Hey, everybody. We're back with Veritas Live, and I'm Demetrius, your host. And today in this episode, we are going to explore the challenges seasonal SMBs are facing and how they can best combat ransomware as a service to be more cyber resilient all year round. And so, Veritas Live is an interactive show, and we want you to feel free to comment or also ask your questions in the chat window. I'd also love to give your city or your country a shout out right now. So please type that into the chat window right now where you are watching from. I'd also like to introduce one of my favorites in the data protection industry, Simon Jelley, who is the VP and GM of data protection right here at Veritas. Simon, welcome to Veritas Live.
Thanks, Demetrius. Really great to be here and looking forward to a great discussion and the questions from our audience today as well.
All right. And I want to find out if you have been watching the Olympics and also what's maybe one of your favorite moments in the Olympics so far.
Yeah, I've been loving the Olympics so far. Hopefully, fingers crossed for Simone Biles and the team today. That's I know that's probably going on very soon. But no, so those who know me know I'm a massive rugby fan. I've coached rugby for many, many years. So I was pleased when rugby returned to the Olympics a couple of Olympics ago. And in particular, been following the progress of the US women's team. They made it into the semifinals, they're on for a bronze, or silver, or gold medal today. So really championing them. I in particular helped start a couple of women's high school teams in the last year. So the build of rugby, particularly amongst women, is a big passion of mine. So pleased to see the US women doing so great. In particular, shout out to, if you follow anyone, follow Alona Ma. She's a massive star within the rugby. I think she's now, thanks to the Olympics and the TikTok and Instagram work she's doing in the background while she's there. So I believe I read yesterday she's now the most followed rugby player on the internet out there. So go follow her coverage as well in the background. I love all the behind the scenes stuff as well as seeing all the live events. But yeah, fingers crossed for the go for the women's US rugby team today.
Okay. Yeah. And so I guess I need to start watching it a lot more because I've only caught some of the highlights. And
Hmm.
I am also curious if anyone out there watching right now in the audience have also been catching any of the Olympics. So please type it in the chat window, maybe your favorite event to watch, and also maybe I'll have to tune in as well. All right, Simon. So really curious here to pick your brain around some really super important cybersecurity topics here. And first, I would like to know what do you see as a top cybersecurity challenge that seasonal SMBs are facing right now at the moment, Simon?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the reality, and we've I think touched on this a number of episodes from various experts before. Cybersecurity or cyber ransomware is a business for people, right? There are vendors out there that really drive producing these ransomware attacks. People like the perpetrators in ransomware as a service like Lockbit. So number one, look, they're going where they're trying to stay in business themselves, right? And ultimately SMBs at the peak of the summer where we're all out of our work on holidays trying to leverage these small vendors, it's a prime time to make that attack, right? They ultimately you're likely to catch an organization that is willing to pay the ransom. And so I think there's three things I think about when it comes to really, kind of what makes SMBs most at risk. So number one, typically they do have, compared to their enterprise comparisons, subpar cybersecurity. Most organizations, SMBs, have between one, if not zero, employees that are dedicated to managing and keeping their cybersecurity and recovery techniques up to date, right? It's not large organizations. Their job is ultimately delivering on that small business need to the end customers themselves. Secondarily, SMBs are more likely to pay the ransom, right? It's a relatively small amount to ultimately stay in business. So they're a sweet spot target for those ransomware perpetrators. And ultimately, it's less risky for the hackers, right? If you look at from a ransomware, if you're trying to stay in business as a ransomware perpetrator and delivering ransomware as a service, going after high profile large organizations is going to bring scrutiny on you, right? You're going to bring the enforcement agencies, law enforcement, big business after you in terms of trying to shut down your services, whereas it's less high profile in terms of going after those SMBs. So again, I think that combination of there's a sweet spot in terms of ease of attack, less up to date in terms of the organizations, and ultimately it's more likely that SMBs will be an easier target in terms of getting the payday from them at the end of the day, makes it frankly a very fruitful ground for the perpetrators. And we saw when it came to the ransomware attacks in 2023 by ransomware as a service providers, they did target companies typically less than 200 employees. So very much they are taking this targeted approach towards SMB organizations.
Hmm. And SMBs also may not have a large enough staff in order to, they're probably stretched thin
Right, exactly.
and they are wearing multiple hats. And there's a lot of statistics out there right now as well about we're continuing to hear cybersecurity teams are really stretched thin and it's a pretty high stress job. But I do want to get your perspective, Simon, on maybe some of the basic tactics that SMBs can enable to address the challenges of ransomware as a service.
Yeah, so I think there's really four that I look at in terms of what are the things they can do. So
Okay.
number one, getting basic awareness training in, right? I think one of the things that you see a lot of the what's happening in terms of the studies of the SMB, most of those attack vectors are phishing attacks,
Hmm.
which training your employees to really recognize those and not, click on the extraneous link, not respond to those messages that are socially engineered in terms of phishing attacks and improving that. I think I saw a stat the other day that suggested that most SMB organizations, less than a quarter, have actually done any kind of awareness training. And there's plenty out there that you can leverage, third parties point people to in terms of publishing that training to your employees and getting educated there. Number two is obviously making sure your basic cybersecurity capabilities, whether that be anti-malware, antivirus capabilities, are up to date, and dedicating some time within the IT management, whether that's, as you say, more likely through the service provider you're working with than likely being you've got dedicated employees, but really working with your MSP. Most SMBs, would likely leverage an MSP and making sure they're keeping that cybersecurity measures up to date. Thirdly, making sure that you've got a backup and recovery capability in place. As we often talk about, that golden copy that's stored offline, immutable storage, making sure even if you don't have those measured in place, you've got a recovery technique that is available to you. And then finally, as a business, really thinking about what is that incident response plan in terms of going there. So again, employee awareness training, cybersecurity measures in place with your MSP or third party provider, backup recovery being in place so that ultimately, if you do have attacks, you've got a final place for recovery, and then having an incident response plan in place. So you understand how you're going to work with your third parties, how you're going to communicate to your customers if that ultimately, if you do have that cybersecurity attack and event.
Yeah, and it's super important as well for them to make sure that they have an ultimate strategy just
Hmm.
around, how are you going to respond? Because and I know myself, even I'm tired of hearing, it's not a matter of if, it's a
Right.
matter of when, right? But that's such a powerful statement because something is going to go wrong one day, and you really have to be prepared and you want to be comfortable enough in order to start walking down that path where you know exactly what you need to do, you know exactly who you need to call, and then you start, just really with your recovery effort. So that's super key. I also wanted to call out as well that I do see people in the chat posting, let's see, looks like Seattle is in the house. California is also in the house. And I do know that there is someone that may be on the beach right now in Italy. I'm
Right.
not quite sure if he has his cell phone signal out there, but wishing I was him at this very moment, Eric. All right. So I also want to ask you a little bit about maybe some of the advanced tactics. So we talked about some of the basic tactics, but what about some of the advanced tactics that smaller businesses should invest in to better protect themselves, especially from things like a ransomware attack, Simon?
Yeah, so I think, going back to that, making sure you've got the latest cybersecurity capabilities and backup recovery capabilities, fundamentally, making sure you have got that point of recovery within your incident plan identified. So new capabilities often within backup recovery capabilities are making sure that you've got a copy of the data that is fundamentally taken offline to immutable storage and completely separated from your existing network and not uh, could be not susceptible to ultimately a ransomware attack on the actual online data itself. That's a fundamental recommendation we make to all customers in terms of making sure they've got that golden copy that they can cover on, and that kind of 3-2-1 backup strategy in terms of your data overall. I think that's critical in terms of, again, either implementing yourself or questioning and working with the provider for your backup recovery to say, do we have that ultimate recovery point? Back to the, it's not an if, it's a when, right? Ultimately, it provides that ultimate recoverability piece. So that's number one. I think the second is making sure that within the capabilities you have for backup recovery, making sure that you've got capability to, one, is your backup and recovery servers and systems themselves protected from ransomware attacks? Because
Mhm.
not surprisingly, again, these ransomware attackers want to stay in business, right? Their motivation is ultimately to extort that data and make sure that they can ultimately get a ransomware fee from that. And if they become smart in terms of attacking the actual backup data and the software data itself, because there is no recovery from that particular point if the backup servers are away. So making sure you've got a backup software, a backup capability in place that itself is ransomware resilient. And then thirdly, there's a lot of new techniques that are being employed in terms of providing anti-malware capability and detection of data within the actual backup processes, right? Using AI and ML tape capabilities to spot the differences in the data that's being protected. So really making sure that backup capability is up to date in terms of leveraging those new capabilities. A third copy offline in terms of immutability, making sure that ransomware resilience is built into the actual infrastructure that's implemented for the backup software and infrastructure itself. And then thirdly, that it's using and able to give you capabilities that use AI and ML to spot anomalies, spot the malware within the actual data that you're protecting, really can enhance your cyber resilience capabilities.
Hmm. Yeah, all great points there, and I really appreciate you bringing AI and ML into the mix here, and that's only going to get smarter as LLMs begin to become more smarter as well, and they are also tapping into some of the best data that's out there and getting smarter to run the analytics and all of that. I think that's going to be super important as well. So, besides some of the tactics that we've talked about, maybe give the audience some resources that they can explore in order to learn more about how to build a sustainable cyber resilience plan, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, certainly visit veritas.com. We have a great cybersecurity site there in terms of helping provide best practices to customers overall. I also recently did launch a post on the Forbes. I write regularly for Forbes in terms of these types of capabilities. So there's a number of best practice articles around cybersecurity, particularly on this technique that I've published overall. And then finally, look, I think the one thing I'd ask every customer out there to assess is really, look, do you have an incident recovery plan at the end of the day? And I think it really starts there. And that starts to then assess, do we have protection, data protection, anti-malware, cybersecurity for all of our data in a simplified way that when we know this event happens, we know who to call, we know how to do that recovery. We've got the steps in place, right? It truly is about preparedness and rehearsal. You can't ultimately recover from the event when it happens. If you wait till the event happens, you're not going to be in any other position
Yeah.
than potentially having to pay for the ransomware. So really go look for those resources that can help you build that incident recovery plan, and that'll be the start to really making sure you've got all of the capabilities we've talked about earlier in this episode in place.
And I just want to let the audience also know that it's a big deal to have Simon kind of locked in right now. We're holding him hostage here, so If you have questions, please type them in the chat window. He would be happy or more than happy to answer your questions. And I also wanted to ask you as well, Simon, what are you hearing as far as just having conversations with high-level executives like CISOs or maybe even CEOs of company, especially because it seems like this should be an old topic, right? It seems like we've been talking about ransomware for years now.
Yeah.
And if you haven't gotten the memo or maybe even have a t-shirt that says RaaS on it or something, I mean, you really should know that you need to protect your organization. So what are some of the conversations that you're having right now, or maybe the number one conversation that you're having with high-level executives right now?
Well, so I think it goes back to the one thing I've said for many years, talking to organizations is most CEOs and COs are aware they have a backup capability in place. It's not, it's something that they've almost taken for granted as that insurance policy.
Mhm.
But what they haven't done and what is changing now is have they ever tested the recovery needs of that capability and the responsiveness to those events? And I think that's the big shift that's happening is how do we put the resources in place, the plan in place that we can regularly do those dress rehearsals and testing. That's the shift I'm seeing is rather than just been something that we know we have and come the event, I'm sure we can rely on it. It's that kind of, but how it works, I don't really know, right? I've never had to actually pull the cord before. Now they're actually pulling that cord as test drills, right? I mean, I've seen organizations that deliberately push fake phishing attacks into their organizations on a regular basis to see if organizations, yeah, their employees do click and cause alerts, right?
Yeah.
It's so they're really putting the testing and the infrastructure in place. They're not just writing down the plan. They're really fire drilling and running the plan itself. And I think that's bringing big reality checks in terms of okay, does the plan work? Right? It's fine to have a plan, but have we actually ever tested it itself?
Ah, nice. And looks like someone from Saudi Arabia and also Nigeria showed up. So appreciate the whole international viewership as well. And Simon, since I don't see any questions from the audience, so closing remarks from you?
Yeah, look, I think again, the thing we all have to have to keep in mind is this is a business for the perpetrators of ransomware, and that's the thing I keep putting in mind for customers. So these seasonal attacks, they're opportunistic in terms of really trying to go if you at the height of where your business is, when you're most susceptible to you need to keep that business running. So the only thing you can do is be prepared for that, as we talked about, have that incident response plan in place, make sure you've got that ultimate recovery point. Make sure you're leveraging the latest cybersecurity. And there's lots of great vendors out there that can help do that. Because again, for SMBs, we totally appreciate this isn't a core part of your job, right? There's typically not going to be dedicated teams to doing that. So go find that help in terms of making sure you've got those capabilities. And again, it really that preparedness is critical in terms of being able to recover when unfortunately that event happens.
All right, everyone. And we do have some great resources that will be posted as well. So, for instance, please check out the blog Summer Seasonal Businesses Can't Afford to Ignore Ransomware Resilience by our very own Simon Jelley. And this is where he shows you how to get started with the basics of cyber resilience and even some advanced strategies to beat the heat. There is also a great solution overview on Veritas Backup Exec malware detection to bolster your data protection defenses as well. And you can check that out also on veritas.com. And finally, if you'd like to get your hands on a trial version of Backup Exec, you can do that. So go register for a free 60-day trial on veritas.com as well. So thanks everyone for tuning in and make sure that you are staying secure out there and you're backing up your data often. Thank you for tuning in.